Hello everybody. Not today, Iceberg Boy. Picture this. The year is 2006. Halo 3 is just around the corner, and Frutiger Arrow's still a thing because tech companies used to give a damn. But something else happened that year. Then 22-year-old Kosemen would write a book that nobody gave a shit about till left-leaning video essayists started talking about it. I'm sorry, I'm really not trying to be mean, that's kinda just how things went down, lol. Obviously, the book in question is All Tomorrows, a hypothetical sci-fi story. No, I'm not gonna say the word thought experiment, next you'll catch me saying shit like media literacy. Anyway, the book is $23 US if you're interested in reading it. Under no circumstances should you go to archive.org and read it yourself. CM Kosemen will come back from the dead. I'm pretty sure he's still alive, but he'll come back from the dead and snap your neck like in Splinter Cell. Anyway, it's a book with funny pictures in it. Let's just start this shit. In a world where Elon Musk actually keeps his promises, I'm still waiting on my state-mandated NecoGF Elon. Humanity embarks on a journey to colonize Mars, but this wasn't done with astronauts. Over a long period of time, humanity had used various comets and asteroids to bring water to Mars. This water was then used to seed artificial plant life. The colonization of Mars was not done with highly trained NASA operatives, my nigga, but by barefoot children on synthetic blades of grass. Eventually, the inhabitants of Mars would start to change. However, instead of looking like Spike from Fortnite, they ended up looking like the damn Thalmor. They became taller, thinner, and their faces became more elongated, which, by the way, there's an actual theory that if humans were born on Mars they would actually look like that, so props to Kosemen for coming up with that. Anyway, their physical forms changed so much that they eventually became their own race, known as the Martian Americans. Then a civil war broke out between Mars and Earth. The war wasn't fought with conventional weapons, but rather machines powered by AI. By the time the war ended, humanity almost drove each other extinct, so to ensure something like this never happens again, they worked together to engineer an entire subspecies of human called the Star People. Wait, is that fucking Jakob? The Star People would then venture out and colonize the rest of the galaxy. This era was seen as a golden age for mankind, known as the Summer of Man. However, as everyone knows, summer is followed by fall. Get it? Cause the fall of man, whatever. The Star People were colonizing a new world, which at this point is just as mundane as building a house. However, this time they found something troubling. You see, the xenofauna on this planet had a skeleton made of copper and 3 limbs. However, they also found a specimen that had 4 limbs and a calcium skeleton. After further examination, it was determined to be a highly evolved dinosaur, a Therizinosaurus to be specific. It was obvious that this species wasn't native to this planet. It was almost as if it was picked up and moved over here by something. Then, we made first contact. A nomadic, godlike species calling themselves the Q. No, not that one. They viewed humans not as a threat, nor an ally, but as a resource. They played with their genetics in the same way a high school student would dissect a frog. But instead of killing them humanely, they wouldn't kill humans at all, but instead mutate their bodies while they were still alive and conscious. Only a lucky few of them would get mostly lobotomized, but most of them were fully conscious and fully aware of their situation, kinda like the movie Tusk. However, there were small groups of Star People that would end up changing one way or another. We'll get to those later, but for now, let's start with some of the less fortunate victims. Alright, sorry if this bit sounds a little rushed or half-assed, I'm just really not in the mood right now. Alright, so at this point, both the Earthlings and the Martians are dead. The Q had killed off nearly everyone, leaving only the Star People. Whether it's beyond our understanding or just for fun, the Q would either mutate the Star People directly or fuck with the genetics of their children. On a planet with a scorching hot sun, low oxygen levels, and city ruins lie the worms, with the morphology of a nematode and the brain power of Cyrax. These creatures primarily lived underground, where they would either mate or consume everything in their path, including each other. On the empty savannas of some fuck-ass planet were the Titans. Standing at 132 feet tall, these like creatures were actually pretty intelligent, even regaining their sentience, living in homes, making wood carvings, and among other people things. Sadly, they would all die out during the planet's ice age. On the other savanna of some other fuck-ass planet were the Predators, sporting long ears, fangs, digitigrade feet, and karambit like thumbs. They had a very low IQ, much like their prey items, which were also people, which had a similar body plan but were obviously herbivores. The mantelopes, oh dear lord, I can't show that. These possibly racist stereotypes fully retained their sentience. This was by design, as the Q had bred them to be memory retainers and singers. These quadruped legics were forced to endure their agony until one fateful day when some mysterious seismic event happened. The smarter ones willingly got themselves killed, while the dumber ones would end up surviving and later going extinct. The Q's life cycle was much like that of a mosquito or a dragonfly. If you're not from the south, then that just means that they start out as an aquatic larva and then grow into what they actually are. So instead of giving their kids an iPad, they start to experiment with whale-like behemoths and ribbon-like eels. Ultimately, the Q was settled down on shark-like people called the swimmers, sporting a dorsal fin on their back, fins and flippers where their hands and feet used to be, and a massive overbite. The lizard herders were just hairy monkey people. The Q had tweaked with their cerebellums in a way that had made them into mostly peaceful primates that were unable to learn. Purely out of instinct, the lizard herders would herd around flocks of giant herbivorous lizards. The tempters were a decorative people, a stationary flesh cone with a giant beak on top. Well, not all of them were like this. The ones I just mentioned were the females. The males were small, kiwi-shaped creatures that tended to the tempters. Kinda like how a gardener takes care of a plant, the females would use pheromones to guide the males into doing whatever they wanted. Kinda like a woman streamer in a tier 3 sub, except these guys actually get pussy. During mating season, the males would crawl into an orifice. The orifice in question was left over from their human counterpart. Thankfully, these monuments of degeneracy would get wiped out by an asteroid. The bone crushers started out as pint-sized pests for the Q. They were bred for the sole purpose of having colorful beaks where their teeth used to be. For one reason or another, the Q abandoned these creatures, and they later became what we now know as the Bone Crushers. Despite the fact that they fed on raw meat and communicated by shitting on each other, the Bone Crushers as a whole were able to achieve almost a medieval level of sentience. Sadly, they would die out anyway because the only thing they fed on was raw meat. After the Q's invasion, there was a small resistance of humans. They called themselves the Colonials, and they lived in a cave somewhere. But that doesn't matter because they actually fought off the Q and won twice. But then the resistance was assaulted for a third time, and this time the Q won. Probably because they had weapons manufactured by Q. I'm sorry I had to do it. Anyway, after the resistance lost a third time, the Q decided to make an example of them. And then the resistance became the Colonials. Remember when I said I'm tired of this shit? That's because my power keeps shutting off and I have to re-record my lines. Anyway, the Colonials were now a human skin blanket. They fully retained their sentience just so they could suffer more. They were in constant agony, and because their nerves were connected, they could feel each other's agony, doubling the pain. Their primary food source was garbage and piss and shit from the Q. They were a living skin blanket, stretched across massive beaches, consuming whatever the Q fed them. But as we move on to the next chapter, we'll find that they were shown some form of mercy. These are the hand flappers. As you can see, this guy's way more confident than I am. The only thing these guys do is eat and flap their hands and flash their genitals during mating rituals. Because that's all they do, they end up going extinct. These are the blind folk. These Robotnikians live in caves, which is why they're blind. Well, I should have just said lived, because they went extinct due to the cave caving in on them. Sonic has definitely had enough. Due to their planet's very low gravity, the Destroyers were able to grow very tall and thin and delicate. They were huge, long-necked herbivores with crests on their heads. Actually, now that I think about it, they look more like the clone breeders from Star Wars Episode 2. Anyway, the planet they lived on used to be a farm for the Star People, meaning the farm animals, more specifically chickens, were able to evolve in different ways. The chickens they once bred turned into chickenosauruses and drove them to extinction. The flyers were humanoids that were able to fly. Their brain power was reduced so that they could fly easier, and their hearts were starfish-shaped. At this point, the Q were getting bored with human genetics. There's only so much you can do with the human genome. So in a half-assed attempt to make something new, they created the Ruin Haunters. Apart from looking like Minecraft villagers, not much was changed about them. They retained their sentience and had access to ancient human technology, thus giving them the delusion that they were the true descendants of the ancient humans. A small group of star people were hiding out in an asteroid belt. The Q had noticed them, and they were able to hide there for millions of years, evolving into what are now the Spacers. Equipped with large eyes, larger brains, the hands and feet of an eye, and level 50 Norwood, the Spacers were starting to evolve better for a zero-G environment. The Lopsiders were essentially human flounders, using 3 hands to move around, and their 4th hand being used as an antenna. Because they were flat, they had eyes on one side of their head. with one eye facing forward and the other one facing upwards. The reason for this is because their planet had a very strong gravity, with the Q adjusting it just to make it harder for them to live. The parasites also used to be human. The Q had bred them for the specific purpose of wiping out the rest of the star people, primarily attacking the females, infesting their wombs and absorbing their nutrients, regardless of if it killed them. With the females seemingly pregnant with these abominations, the males had no way to reproduce, thus killing off all the other star people, or at least that was the idea. The fingerfishers lived on a water planet that was made up of many islands. Look, I know what you're thinking, this book predates AOT by like 3 years, I think. The Aaron Jaegerians had long horse-like faces and long fingers used for fishing, with giant fish hooks on the end. The hedonists probably had the best lives out of all of them. Their diet was mostly fruits and coconuts, and their planet had absolutely no natural predators. The only thing they really did was have sex. A lot of it. This is because the Q had lowered the male sperm count as a means of population control. The insectivi, as their name would suggest, were insectivores. Their long tongues were used for feeding, much like an anteater, and they had leathery faces as a way to protect them from insect bites. As I mentioned earlier, the Q were nomadic, so once they got done destroying what was left of the human form, they fucked off, leaving the humanimals to fend for themselves. Most of the humanimals from earlier, and a few others that the book didn't mention, ended up going extinct, giving only a few of them to re-evolve back into what they once were. The worms would later evolve into the snake people. No, not that one. Instead of having hands and feet, they had a four-fingered hand on the end of their tail. Their face has a rat-like appearance, and inside of its head is a spiral-shaped brain. They live in cities, listen to music, read books, wear clothing, smoke, and make use of whatever that thing is. Alright, look, I'm going to abridge a lot here because the book really likes to go into detail about what their politics are and what these creatures did in their day-to-day lives. I'm gonna straight up not mention some of those details just because it's fucking boring, and it also gives you a reason to buy the book, which therefore makes this video fair use. Anyway, the predators would later evolve into the killer folk. The killer folk were basically if you took the average redneck and a brute from Halo and mashed them together. Or maybe the Yautja from Predator, wherever you get the idea. Their firearms and clothing were very rugged and sloppily made. Their physiology was still very much like that of a carnivore, but instead of being mindless animals, they had a very sophisticated warrior culture. Also, for what it's worth, DeviantArt did their thing and made OCs of them. You know this now. Much like how modern day dolphins utilize organisms the same way we use technology, the swimmers had to utilize the organisms in their environment and breed them into tools, thus making them the tool breeders. The tool breeders would utilize lesser organisms to create tools, weapons such as dart launchers, and vehicles such as living spaceships. The reason I brought up dolphins earlier is because physically they would start to look more like cetaceans. The lizard herds grew bigger and more stupider like Jupiter. However, the reptiles they took care of later became intelligent and domesticated the humans, and these sapient lizards became known as the Saurosapiens. Yeah, they're Argonians, I'm just gonna call it like it is. Due to the Q's absence, the colonials were free to evolve in whichever direction they wanted. What was once a living restroom had now divided into several smaller colonies, with each cell serving a special purpose within that colony, sort of like how an octopus's tentacle works. The colonies would then start to experiment with different combinations and different weapons just to see which would be the best way to survive. Much like an AR-15, it's easier to modify what you already have rather than create something new entirely, and thus the modular people were born. One creature made up of many organisms with interchangeable parts for different situations. Sure, they were alive and could act independently, but for them it was easier to just combine into a superorganism. As the flyers later became smarter, they became known as the Pterosapiens. I know it's pronounced Pterosapiens, I said it incorrectly to make you angry. Physically speaking, they're not really horrifying, they're more so just ugly as fuck. Aside from that, they were prone to heart attacks and they had very short lifespans. They reach sexual maturity at 2 and become middle-aged at 16. Pause. Physically, the lopsiders were pretty much the same, but they were smart now, building tiny pancake-shaped hobbit holes. And eventually, much like their ancient human ancestors, were able to genetically modify a better version of themselves, called the car crash asymmetric people. Biker's fault. Anyway, this subspecies with half a face only a mother could love decided to start a race war with the Ricky Berwickians, eventually winning the war against the cripples and taking their place. At some point, the parasites decided, you know, killing our hosts isn't really good if we want to keep using them, so the relationship between the star people and the parasites became symbiotic, turning the parasites into symbiotes.
The Black One.
Rather than incubating internally, the symbiotes would sit externally on their foreheads. Each symbiote could have multiple hosts, keeping them in stables and taking care of, sort of like how a rancher takes care of horses. The finger fishers, the Freddy Fingerers, the kids named Finger or whatever the hell, the legally distinct not Aaron Yeagers became the sail people, due to the fact that they were already very widespread because of the massive oceans. Plus their new way of transportation via water, they essentially became living pirate ships, harassing each other, and plundering booty. Again, physically, they were sailboats, except they have tongues, which are also tentacles, that they use for spearfishing. Play this video on full volume next to your coworkers and count how many weird faces you get. The hedonists were facing extinction, so their sperm count was raised by a significant amount. Their morphology resembled that of a velociraptor, and they had fully regained their sentience. Really, the only thing that hadn't changed was their very high libido. The book also says that they now have boneless organs. I don't know what the hell a boneless organ is, but they have that, I guess. The insect Dilophodogogavitis later became the bug facers. They're called bug facers because they started to resemble the food they ate after a long time. These guys were one of the most intelligent species, industrializing far quicker than the other ones we've covered. However, as soon as they were capable of space travel, they were then attacked by a mysterious alien race. The book doesn't specify who these aliens were. It could have been the damn Covenant for all we know. The mystery aliens made an attempt at an invasion, but the bug facers actually won. Understandably, this event made them highly xenophobic. This will be important later. The spacers later became the astromorphs. Asteriomorphs, whatever. Their zero-G environment allowed their brains to grow incredibly large. Their skeletons were also very weak, and because they used their own farts as transportation, their anuses became horrifically prolapsed. Despite their spooky appearance, their intelligence made them incredibly smart, which made them into very powerful gods. Flesh and blood gods, silently watching as the humanimals slowly regained their sentience. Over time, these now sentient post-humans would establish communication with each other via radio. None of these species were able to meet each other face to face because they lived light years away from each other. However, since they could talk to each other, they were able to share each other's knowledge and technology and other things. The way they were able to do this is by utilizing ancient human technology and items left over by the Q. Apart from their language and the giant pyramids, there wasn't much left over by the Q for them to use. But regardless, the subhumans knew their origins and chose to unite. The Saurosapiens weren't human, but they sided with the humans anyway because they understood the Q was a threat. Due to their xenophobia, the bug facers were absolutely scared of everything and everyone, so they chose to stick to themselves. Even though they couldn't visit each other, they could only talk to each other, they still decided that the risk was just too great. The astromorphs were already doing their own thing and chose not to interact with the other empires. The Ruin Hunters didn't know of the other empires. They already had the ancient human technology at their disposal, so they chose to upgrade their weapons so that they could defend themselves from the Q. However, as their technology progressed, the Ruin Hunters found it more viable to upload their consciousness into machines so that they could live forever as weapons and machines. And thus they became the Gravitals. The Gravitals were very egotistical and self-important. These machines were never built to make things right, so they caved into their violent tendencies and destroyed most of the sentient life in the galaxy. The Gravitals themselves were very sphere-shaped, which is like, bro, you could be any robot and you choose to be a fucking orb. There were other machines that they turned themselves into, but the ones you'll see most commonly are the orbs. Anyway, they had complete hatred for the subhumans, so they sought out to destroy all of them. They used giant sail-like ships to completely glass the planets they lived on. Surprisingly, this didn't result in a complete extinction of the subhumans. Much like how the Q kept a portion of humanity alive for experimentation, the Orbitals chose to experiment with the bug facers. Out of all the other species, the bug facers were the only ones that were kept alive for experimentation as test subjects, making them the subjects. The subjects weren't necessarily an entirely different species, but rather bug facers with bizarre mutations. Most of these mutations simply made them abnormal, but some of them had specific purposes in mind, such as this one that just plays whatever song is popular. Like, imagine you are born and your whole purpose in life is that you're a JBL speaker blasting Fetty Wap all day. The only other machine we get to see in the book is this stationary tablet-shaped one that has tentacles on it. Simply dubbed the other machines, they were religious leaders and philosophers, held in high regard by the Gravitals. Despite the fact that they were machines, they still maintained some human traits. Along with their narcissism, they carried out daily routines much like real humans. Another very human emotion they carried over was love, as the machines would start to develop romantic relations with their insectoid creations. The Gravitals and the Astromorphs that I mentioned earlier had been eyeing each other, fearing that someday a war might break out, and broke out. The war indeedly did. For the next 1 million years, an intergalactic civil war would break out among the post-humans, primarily among the Astromorphs and the Gravitals. The book doesn't really specify anything, it kinda just spoils it and says that the Astromorphs won. Again, the Astromorphs being the spacefaring species. Through enough self-experimentation, they kinda started to resemble the Q, with their brains extending outwards like giant ears and their limbs looking like that. I mean, hell, they even have an abdomen and a thorax, kinda like an insect. After the war ended, the Astromorphs decided it was finally time to get involved, and thus begins the post-war galaxy. After the war was over, the Astromorphs finally decided to start getting involved with the other races. The way they did this was by engineering a subspecies that was even more insect-like, basically just terrestrial versions of the Astromorphs, simply dubbed the Terrestrials. They were sent to the sub-people's homeworlds in order to watch over them as a sort of baron or king. There were some that were greedy and self-serving, but the Astromorphs would recognize that and end up getting rid of them, and over time the subhuman empire would begin to thrive. As far as said post-humans go, we have the Astromorphs, the Terrestrials, and the subjects who, again, were formerly bug-facers. That's about it for the biological post-humans. The Gravitals would become the new machines. What were once spaceships, tablets, and spheres were now mindless tools made up of lazy plot devices, otherwise known as nanomachines. Much like the worms from Chapter 1, the machines would take up a worm-like appearance, their minds and personalities completely stripped away and turned into living tools, basically. The reason they were made up of nanomachines was so that they could turn parts of their body into tools that were specialized for whatever job they were doing. That and performing labor in outer space. These non-organic organisms were discriminated against by the people that actually were organic. Something space racism, something Warhammer. Anyway, thanks to this new system, they were able to build up a highly advanced civilization. A civilization that was very close to the one that the Star People had. It wasn't just their own advancements. They were able to continue what the Rune Hunters were doing and dig up old human technology. To be specific, they rediscovered ancient spaceships and an ancient superweapon called a Dyson Sphere. To give you the short version, Dyson Spheres were used to consume star power and sun power to destroy planets. I know that's not the official scientific version, but that's the one in the story. It's basically a halo ring if you think about it. Also, like a halo ring, the Dyson Sphere was a one-time use weapon, and luckily they had found it unused. Somehow the Star People never got to use it against the Q all those millions of years ago. Not much was left behind by the Star People, so it's unknown why it was unused, but should the Q return, they'll finally have a fighting chance. The book doesn't have a specific name for these new people, so I'm gonna give it my own name just to make it easier for myself and call them the Imperials, or the Empire. The Empire had their own version of SETI, listening and waiting for any intelligent life that might reach out to them, and in doing this, humanity would make second contact. A new alien species called the Amphicephali. I swear to God, half the names of these creatures sound like an STD. The Amphicephalites were a seemingly reptilian species that lived in a larger snake-like organism that in itself lived in an even larger organism, sort of like a Russian nesting doll. The two civilizations would strike an alliance with each other, both knowing that the Q was a threat to both of them. The alliance with the Amphicephalites was important because they also had a super weapon that was kind of like the Dyson Sphere, and so the two factions had made plans to take the fight to the Q. So, the post-humans and the Amphicephali are now friends. Both of their plans are dying in, and neither side is going to tell each other that because they don't know who's going to switch up on who. They eventually find the Q, and they both start another war. Throughout all these millions of years, the Q haven't changed a single bit. In fact, the same exact ones from the first invasion are still there. The humans and the I'm just going to call them the Allies. The Allies activate the super weapon and destroy the Q once and for all. That's how the Q dies. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. The Allies fly off into the sunset and go their separate ways. And that's pretty much as far as we know. Until recently, a lone chronicler would then rediscover the humans' homeworld, Earth. The planet is completely empty, with absolutely no sign of any previous civilization. It's completely wild and untamed. The only real evidence of their existence are 6 plastic figures called Bionicles. The Bionicles were made to represent some kind of religion, and to this very day, there are still people that have faith in Mata Nui. As for the fate of humanity, I have a confession. Humankind, the very species which I've been chronicling from its terrestrial infancy to its domination of the galaxies, is extinct. All the beings which you saw in the preceding pages, from the lowly worm to the wind-riding sail people, from the egotistical gravitals to the ultimate galactic citizens, lie a billion years dead. We were only beginning to piece together the story. What I just told you was our best approximation of the truth. Why did they disappear? Perhaps it was a final, unimaginable war of annihilation, or maybe they were killed by Makuta. Ultimately, however, what happened to humanity does not matter. Like every other story, it was just a temporary one. Indeed long, but ultimately ephemeral. It did not have a coherent ending, but then again, it didn't need to. The tale of humanity was never the ultimate domination of 1,000 galaxies, or its mysterious exit into the unknown. The essence of being human was none of that. Instead, it lay in the radio conversations of the still human machines, in the daily lives of the bizarrely twisted bug-facers, in the endless love songs of the carefree hedonists, the rebellious demonstrations of the first true Martians, and in a way, the very life you lead at the moment. Many throughout history were unaware of this most basic fact. The Q, in dreams of an ideal future, distorted the worlds they came across. Later on, the Gravitals, with their insane desire to recreate the past, create the biggest massacres in the history of the galaxy. Even now, it is sickeningly easy for beings to get lost in false grand narratives, living out completely driven lives in pursuit of non-existent ultimates, ideals, climaxes, and golden ages. In blindly thinking that their stories serve absolute ends, such creatures almost always end up harming themselves, if not those around them. To those like them, look at the story of man and come to your senses. It's not the destination, but the trip that matters, and what you do today influences tomorrow, not the other way around. Love today and seize all tomorrows. So, if you're not familiar, this is a subgenre of sci-fi called speculative evolution. The basic premise of stories like this is that you take the perfect specimen of a certain species and come up with ways that it can evolve. And All Tomorrows tries to tell a rather horrific version of how this could happen. Sometime after the book came out, YouTubers would start to cover it, which gave the book more traction and brought more attention towards it. And thanks to this attention, we got fan art and fan fiction that spawned from it, the most popular of which being All Other Tomorrows, a story that, mostly told on DeviantArt, is mostly focused on the creatures that don't really get to evolve or the ones that end up going extinct. So if you would rather have a version where the Tempters become this weird like military thing that actually kind of looks cool, then there's that for you. Otherwise, because it's not canon, I'm not going to get into it that much. Just look at the cool picture. This thing's really hard to hold. I put a sock over my microphone to act as a sort of pop filter, and it's like on the shaft. It's like really hard to get a grip on. Assuming you have the ability to read, then you know this is the theories chapter of the video. And as far as theories go, there's not too many of them. Most of them are really if I'm being honest, all the theories are kind of just retarded. So I'm going to explain my theory, which is really the only one that matters. So, when we start from the beginning, we have humanity, like actual, genuine human people. Then sometime later, we have Martians, and then Star People. The Star People were created to stop the, basically, space racism between the Earthlings and the Martians. This implies that there wasn't already racism between the Earthlings, or between the Martians. You don't know, there could have been a different kind of Martian that wasn't liked by everyone. It mentions the Earthlings and the Martians as a whole, and then later, obviously, the Star People were created to stop the racism between the Earthlings and the Martians. Which tells me that there must have been one type of Earthling and one type of Martian, and then those two types of people fused together to become the Star People, which were just one type of person. And then when we get to the end of the book, and we get to the author's note, the author explains the story to us like it's in the present, like this isn't from your future, like this is from someone that's alive today, basically. And everything I just mentioned, combined with the fact that the pictures look the way they do, they look like they were salvaged from somewhere. So all these facts together, combine them, tells me that this is actually a textbook from an alternate dimension, an alternate reality where the Q really did invade Earth and Mars and destroy what was left of humanity. and that everything at the end of the book is supposed to take place today, present day. Why do I think all this? Why did I come to the conclusion that there is only one type of Earthling or one type of Martian? Well, you see, we never see any Earthlings, and we only see one Martian, and we only see like maybe 3 star people that all look the same. So it's possible that the star people are not a combination of 2 different races, but actually one race with some DNA from another race mixed in, which would mean that in this universe the Earthlings look more like star people than they do like us. Yeah, I know the theory does sound stupid, but I have to pad out the runtime. And with all that being said, thank you for staying, and I hope you enjoyed. In other news, I got my Zitter account back. Link right there and in down below. I also have a trash ass Discord server if you're interested for whatever reason. I know for a fact people are gonna get pissed at me if I don't credit the animators from the animations that I've used, so here it is. Yep, that's it.
You're a poopy head. Yeah, I got pens and I'm not afraid to use them.